Welcome to the third video on strategic foresight, and today we'll dive into the how. First of all, we need to set the context. We need to define the scope, the objectives, going back to the questions that I discussed in the last video. We need to decide with the leadership what are the critical ones we need to get the answers to. And we also need to decide on the time frame for foresight projects. So are we looking 5, 10, or maybe 20 years ahead? That will actually define what are the next steps and what is the end product of the strategic foresight project. But quite often, the next step would be gathering insights. So we're looking both externally at structural forces of change and emerging trends, and internally within the organization to understand their strategy, their plans, and any knowledge gaps that they might have. I'll maybe pause here just to kind of explain what's the difference between structural forces of change and emerging trends. So structural forces of change is something that affects all of the industries globally, the whole economy. Those are really the long-term shifts that are quite well documented. An example of that could be demographical shifts or climate changes. Emerging trends can be less universal in their impact, so they might be relevant for some, not all of the industries. They could also be in very different stages of maturity and development. So you can have trends that are already impacting your industry or industry close to you, or you can have only weak signals that are showing that something is bubbling up and will happen in a longer term perspective. The complexity of the world today is related to the fact that we have a very big number of structural forces of change and emerging trends. And they're correlated, and they create almost a system of change around the environment. So it's very important to understand how they influence each other. Do they enforce each other, or are they blocking each other? And as a first step in a strategic foresight project, you need to also look at which of those are most uncertain to your organization and which one would have the most impact. Once we have that, we move on to developing those future scenarios, which quite often is the most exciting part of the foresight project. So we work to visualize and imagine those possible plausible futures. Saying that every scenario has to be reliable in a sense that we need to have a clear path on how we ended up in the future, what had to happen for us to land there. And those scenarios have to be also written in a very believable way. So anyone that kind of takes the presentation later on and reads about this future scenario understand how he ended up there and can almost feel like he's in that future already. Once we have those scenarios, we're going back to this initial stage and those initial questions, and we move into so what. We might be looking at how the existing strategy works in all those different scenarios. We might be looking how the innovation plans would develop in those possible futures. Or we might be looking to answer a question on what is my client looking at in 10 years' time in one of those futures and what behaviors I could expect. With that, I would like to ask you, how do you keep track of the trends? Do you read any market reports? Are you looking at trends outside of your industry at all? Please let me know in the comments.